The story of the Brigand begins in 1942, when the Royal Air Force began looking for a fast, long-range torpedo aircraft to replace the Bristol Beaufighter, issuing specification H742. In response, Bristol, with a team led by Leslie J. Frizz, submitted their Type 164 for consideration. The Type 164 Brigand was derived from the Bristol Buckingham bomber, utilising the same wings, tail and undercarriage designs that had appeared on the Buckingham bomber. Furthermore, it would also utilise the Bristol Centaurus engines, like the Buckingham. Specifically, the Brigand would utilise the Centaurus 57 engine. Originally, the team had looked at the possibility of upgrading the Beaufighter design. However, it was realised early on that the Hercules power plant of the Beaufighter would prove not capable of reaching the 300 knots at sea level that the Air Ministry required. The Centaurus engines would be needed to reach such speeds. In April 1943, a prototype was ordered, and the following year, on the 4th of December 1944, the prototype Brigand MX-988 took to the skies for its maiden flight with Captain Cyril Unwin at the controls. After testing, an initial order of 200 aircraft arrived. The Brigand was envisioned to serve in the Far East to be used on long-range strikes against Japanese shipping. However, the Second World War came to an end before any had made it into service. Furthermore, following the end of the war, the original order of 200 was cut back to 120. This would be later followed by a further order for 52 Brigand B1s, although of this second order, 8 were cancelled and 16 delivered as MET 3s, but more on this later. In 1946, the first 11 off the production line were handed over to the RAF, where they were earmarked to serve with Coastal Command. However, by now, the RAF had decided that Coastal Command no longer needed a torpedo strike aircraft, and as a result, the 11 Brigands never went into proper service. These 11 would be known as the TF Mark I. Still, there was interest in the Brigand, and the next model to appear was the B Mark I, which was a Grand Attack strike aircraft. The 11 TF Mark I Brigands were sent back to the factory, where they were converted to this new standard, and 99 B Mark Is were delivered to the RAF. The B Mark I were similar to that of the TF Mark I, although it lost the ability to carry torpedoes, and the rear guns were removed. The crew of 3 would still remain though: pilot, navigator, and wireless operator. The cockpit windshield piece was also redesigned. The B Mark I was equipped with 4 20mm forward-firing cannons, and bomb racks were fitted, making it capable of carrying up to 2,000 pounds of bombs. Sources also state that rocket racks were added for the B Mark I. However, there is photographic evidence to contradict this. There are photos of TF Mark I aircraft equipped with torpedoes and rockets. The Brigand B Mark I started being delivered to RAF units in 1948. With the first deliveries for frontline squadrons occurring the year later. 3 operational squadrons would utilise the Brigand, that being numbers 8, 45 and 84 squadrons. Number 84 Squadron was the first to take stock of the new type when the first one arrived in February of 1949. At the time, the squadron was based at RAF Habanya, Iraq. Number 8 Squadron, based at Komaska, Aden, was next in April 1949, and finally Number 45 Squadron, at the time based at Negombo, Ceylon, current day Sri Lanka, in June. As the Malayan Emergency unfolded, by November 1949, Number 45 Squadron had been relocated to Singapore so they could be utilised for missions over Malaya. Hence, they were the first to take the Brigand into combat, flying the type's first combat mission on December 19, 1949. Over Malaya, the type was utilised as a strike aircraft to hit communist targets in the jungle, as well as to provide air support for troops and air cover for convoys in case of an ambush. In 1950, the Brigands of Number 8 Squadron was also moved to Singapore, where they too began undertaking strikes against targets within Malaya. However, it was not long until a number of issues arose with the Brigand. The first problem that arose, and perhaps the least serious, was that it was never guaranteed on landing that the main undercarriage would lower, and thus forcing the pilot to make a belly landing. This was due to the seals in the hydraulics deteriorating, with the deterioration being put down to the hot and humid conditions the aircraft was serving in.
The next issue arose during fighting in Malaya. The cannons would sometimes explode when conducting strafing runs, usually causing significant damage to the aircraft. This was said to be due to the long cannon blast tubes sometimes trapping the propellant gases. Thus, if using high explosive rounds, the gases had a tendency to ignite and then explode. The solution to this was to minimize the usage of high explosive rounds and limit how much ammunition was loaded. And there were periods of time where the brigands were prohibited from utilizing their cannons until the problem was solved. Another issue that arose was with the propellers. The issue here was that a propeller blade would come off mid-flight. This in turn would cause the propeller to fail, and then this would trigger the unbalanced engine to detach itself from the wing and the aircraft would crash. During mid-1951, brigands were grounded for a short period of time while this issue was solved. The blame for this problem once again lay in the humidity of the tropics. The humidity was said to be causing the propeller locking rings to corrode, and the only solution devised for this scenario was a stricter maintenance schedule. And finally, the humidity caused issues with the air brakes that were utilized for dive bombing. Specifically, the leather bellows would deteriorate in such conditions, and as a result, the dive brakes would fail. For this, the air brakes were wired shut. It should also be noted that the Brigand was never originally envisioned to be a dive bomber, and this did cause some further complications. No doubt, the Brigand was not well suited for the tropics. At times during the service over Malaya, concerns were raised about the continuation of operations with brigands, although ultimately they would continue to utilize them until new aircraft types came available. A strict maintenance schedule was brought in to try and minimize the problems, and they would still push on and provide important air support for the troops on the ground. It is interesting, most secondary sources will state that the Brigand was a pleasant and relatively good aircraft to fly. Some even describe it as robust. Perhaps that is true when nothing was going wrong, however I believe that this is too much of a generalization. As one website, written by Terry Stringer, ex-Brigand pilot who flew them over Malaya, wrote, quote, "In time we found it difficult to suppress at least a tinge of fear as we climbed aboard the brutes and wondered if we would subsequently emerge safely through the same hatch, and all of us, at time, felt uneasy about flying them." End quote. The Brigand was soldier on in Malaya for a few years. Number 45 Squadron gave them up for the de Havilland Hornet in January 1952, after having flown close to 1,600 sorties with the type. Their last strike on the Brigand occurred on the 7th of February. In February the following year, 84 Squadron was disbanded in Malaya, having conducted some 1,650 sorties over Malaya. The other squadron to utilise the Brigand was number 8 Squadron, and they would transfer onto the de Havilland Vampire at the end of 1952. The Brigand was mainly built in the B1 variant, however there was a handful of other variants also built. The Brigand Mark II was a planned training version, but none were ever built. The Met 3 was next, these being 16 built specifically to undertake meteorological flights. Met 3s had all armament removed and were set up with special weather recording equipment. An oxygen system and long-range fuel tanks were added in addition to an array of equipment designed for high-altitude flights. 16 were taken on charge by the RAF between November 1948 and February 1949, although 6 would only ever be used. These 6 were sent to Malaya, where with the number 1301 flight, they flew around about 600 weather sorties. Next was a T4, which was a trainer version designed as a radar trainer to assist the training of radar operators, with these appearing at 228 OCU at RAF Leeming in 1950. These were unarmed and only 9 were built on the production line as T4, with the other 33 being converted B1s. Finally, there was a T5, which housed updated radar equipment when compared to the T4, resulting in a slightly longer nose and was utilized for the same role. Furthermore, many B1s were converted to use as trainers. The Brigand would be officially retired from service during March 1958, with one final flypast of 6 T5s occurring during that month. There was interest from the Pakistan Air Force, and 2 examples were flown there for evaluation, but orders were not forthcoming. And its service in Malaya was valuable. Still though, it was plagued with an array of problems that perhaps meant that it never properly fulfilled its potential.